Page 10. So only Beezus was left to read Scoopy to Ramona. Plainly, something had to be done, and it was up to Beezus to do it. But what? Arguing with Ramona was a waste of time. So was appealing to her better nature. The best thing to do with Ramona, Beezus had learned, was to think up something to take the place of whatever her mind was fixed upon. And what could take the place of the littlest steam shovel? Another book, of course, a better book, and the place to find it was certainly the library. Ramona, how would you like me to take you to the library to find a different book? Beezus asked. She really enjoyed taking Ramona places, which of course was quite different from wanting to go someplace herself and having Ramona insist on tagging along. For a moment, Ramona was undecided. Plainly, she was torn between wanting the littlest steam shovel read aloud again and the pleasure of going out with Beezus. Okay, she agreed at last. Get your sweater while I tell Mother, said Beezus. Clunk, clunk, shouted Ramona, happily. When Ramona appeared with her sweater, Beezus stared at her in dismay. Oh no, she thought. She can't wear those to the library. On her head, Ramona wore a circle of cardboard with 2 long paper ears attached. The inside of the ears were colored with pink crayon, Ramona's work at nursery school. I'm the Easter Bunny, announced Ramona. Mother, wailed Beezus, you aren't going to let her wear those awful ears to the library. Why, I don't see why not. Mother sounded surprised that Beezus should object to Ramona's ears. They look so silly. Whoever heard of an Easter bunny in September? Beezus complained as Ramona hopped up and down to make her ears flop. I just hope we don't meet anyone we know, Beezus thought, as they started out the front door. But the girls had no sooner left the house when they saw Mrs. Weiser, a lady who lived in the next block, coming toward them with a friend. It was too late to turn back. Mrs. Weiser had seen them and was waving. Why, hello there, Beatrice, Mrs. Weiser said, when they met. I see you have a dear little bunny with you today. Yes. Beezus didn't know what else to say. Ramona obligingly hopped up and down to make her ears flop. Mrs. Weiser said to her friend, as if Beezus and Ramona couldn't hear, Isn't she adorable? Both children knew whom Mrs. Weiser was talking about. If she had been talking about Beezus, she would have said something quite different. Such a nice girl, probably. A sweet child, adorable, never. Just look at those eyes, said Mrs. Weiser. Ramona beamed. She knew whose eyes they were talking about. Beezus knew too, but she didn't care. Mother said blue eyes were just as pretty as brown. Mrs. Weiser leaned over to Ramona. What color are your eyes, sweetheart? She asked. Brown and white, said Ramona promptly. Brown and white eyes, exclaimed the friend. Isn't that cunning? Beezus had thought it was cunning the first time she had heard Ramona say it about a year ago. Since then, she had given up trying to explain to Ramona that she wasn't supposed to say she had brown and white eyes, because Ramona always answered, "My eyes are brown and white." And Beezus had to admit that, in a way, they were. "And what is the little bunny's name?" asked Mrs. Weiser's friend. "My name is Ramona Geraldine Quimby," answered Ramona, and then added generously, "My sister's name is Beezus." "Beezus!" exclaimed the lady. "What an odd name! Is it French?" "Oh, no," said Beezus, wishing, as she so often did, that she had a more common nickname, like Betty or Patsy. She explained as quickly as she could how she happened to be called Beezus. Ramona did not like to lose the attention of her audience. She hitched up the leg of her overalls and raised her knee. "See my scab," she said proudly. "I fell down and hurt my knee, and it bled and bled." "Ramona!" Beezus was horrified. "You aren't supposed to show people your scabs." "Why?" asked Ramona. That was one of the most exasperating things about Ramona. She never seemed to understand what she was not supposed to do. "It's a very nice scab," said Mrs. Weiser's friend, but she did not look as if she really thought it was nice. "Well, we must be going," said Mrs. Weiser. "Goodbye, Mrs. Weiser," said Beezus politely, and hoped that if they met anyone else they knew, she could somehow manage to hide Ramona behind a bush. "Bye-bye, Ramona," said Mrs. Weiser. "Goodbye," said Ramona, and Beezus knew that she felt that a girl who was 4 years old was too grown up to say bye-bye. Except for holding Ramona's hand, crossing streets, Beezus lingered behind her the rest of the way to the library. She hoped that all the people who stopped and smiled at Ramona would not think that they were together. When they reached the Glenwood Branch Library, she said, "Ramona, wouldn't you like me to carry your ears for you now?" "No," said Ramona flatly. Inside the library, Beezus hurried Ramona into the boys and girls section and seated her on a little chair in front of the picture books. "See, Ramona," she whispered, "here's a book about a duck. Wouldn't you like that?" "No," said Ramona in a loud voice. Beezus's face turned red with embarrassment when anyone or everyone in the library looked at Ramona's ears and smiled. "Shh," she whispered as Miss Grievers, the grown-ups librarian, frowned in their direction. "You're supposed to speak quietly in the library." Beezus selected another book. "Look, Ramona, here's a funny story about a kitten that falls into the goldfish bowl. Wouldn't you like that?" "No," said Ramona in a loud whisper. "I want to find my own book." If only Miss Evans, the children's librarian, were there. She would know how to select a book for Ramona. Beezus noticed Miss Griever glanced disapprovingly in their direction, while the other grown-ups watched Ramona and smiled. "All right, you can look," Beezus agreed to keep Ramona quiet. "I'll go find a book for myself." When Beezus had selected her book, She returned to the picture book section, where she found Ramona sitting on the bench with both arms clasped around a big, flat book. "I found my book," she said, and held it up for Beezus to see. On the cover was a picture of a steam shovel and its jaws full of rocks. The title was Big Steve the Steam Shovel. "Oh, Ramona," whispered Beezus in dismay. "You don't want that book." "I do too," insisted Ramona, forgetting to whisper. "You told me I could pick out my own book." Under the disapproving stare of Miss Greaver, Beezus gave up. Ramona was right. Beezus looked with distaste at the big orange-colored book in its stout library binding. At least it would be due in 2 weeks. But Beezus did not feel very happy at the thought of 2 more weeks of steam shovels. And it was just went to show how Ramona always got her own way. Beezus took her book and Ramona's to Mrs. Greaver's desk. "Is this where you pay for the books?" asked Ramona. "We don't have to pay for the books," said Beezus. "Are you going to charge them?" Ramona asked. Beezus pulled her library card out of her sweater pocket. "I show this card to the lady, and she lets us keep the books for 2 weeks. A library isn't a store where you buy things." Ramona looked as if she did not understand. "I want a card," she said.